Good morning, everybody. Let me do a quick sound check. Make sure you can all hear me. Can you all hear me? Good morning. From New Jersey, lots of people from New Jersey. Can you hear me? Okay. Make sure you can hear me. Excellent, excellent. Good deal. Good morning, Patricia. Wonderful. If at any point in time you can't hear me, please let me know. Hello from Oregon, California, New Jersey, Chicago, Arizona. My goodness, Georgia. We have a lot of people. Tennessee. We have somebody from just about everywhere. Great to visit with all of you today. The first thing I want to remind you of is that we do have private tutoring. So you would just go to prepagent.com to schedule your tutoring session. And at that tutoring session, I go over all of the topics to make it very, very easy for you to understand. Oh, there's somebody from Texas. I'm in Dallas today. It's hot here. Oh, Veronica, she's in Texas as well. And Ida. Oh, Michelle is in Texas. Lots of Texans here today. Boy, it is hot and humid here. Is it hot where you are today? I have on here Cynthia's suitcase of real estate topics because, as I've told you before, a lot of passing the exam is going to be organizing your thought process and how you store that information. So the best way to do that is to have all those suitcases in your brain. So I have them right there for you. I have a suitcase right there for you so that you can see. And you're going to have a bunch of suitcases in your brain. And today the one that we're going to fill up is on federal fair housing and environmental laws. It's a very fascinating topic. I think you'll enjoy it. Send me your questions. I'll be watching the chat. So we'll go ahead and get started. So what exactly is the Fair Housing Act? HUD's definition, and HUD, Housing and Urban Development, they're the ones who oversee the fair housing laws, the rules, making sure everybody is following them. They define it as it protects people from discrimination when they are renting or buying a home, getting a mortgage, seeking housing assistance, or engaging in other housing-related activities. To sum that up, it says that everybody gets a fair and equal chance to purchase that property. We cannot discriminate against anyone. Always remember, everybody gets the same fair and equal chance. I have included HUD's website where I got that definition. HUD.gov has some fantastic information on the Fair Housing Act. They also have lawsuits, cases that you can read about that are fascinating. Sometimes that's a great way to learn as well. So that is HUD's definition of the Fair Housing Act. So just remember, we're going to treat everybody completely equal. That's right, Rosemary. No discrimination for housing. Absolutely. Cannot discriminate. That's right, Shuba. Protects against discrimination. A race is included in one of the protected classes, so we cannot discriminate against anybody for any reason there. Our next slide goes into a little more definition. It says the Fair Housing Act declares a national policy of fair housing throughout the United States. The law makes it illegal for any discrimination in the sale, lease, or rental of housing, or making housing otherwise unavailable because of race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, which I'll be defining for you here shortly, or national origin. Oh, Rosanna, that's good. She just got her fair housing certificate. I want to go over a little bit of a timeline with you regarding the different laws and how they came about, when they came about. The first thing we had was the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And this prohibited all racial discrimination in the sale or rental of property. So that goes back a long time. 1866 was a long time ago. Then, April 11th, 1968, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1968. And it was a follow-up to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So this 68 Act is where it really went in and it started expanding and really defining that we cannot discriminate against anybody. So it expanded on previous acts, prohibited discrimination concerning the sale, the rental, the financing of housing, and that was all based on race, religion, national origin, sex, handicapped, and family status, which means the same thing as familial status. Title 8 of the Act, also known as the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Also remember that this act has been amended several times. When they first came out with familial status and added it, they called it family composition. Well, no one knew what family composition meant, so they came in after that and changed it to familial status. So over the years, the Civil Rights Act of 1968 has been amended. Yes, children under the age of 18 is what we're talking about in familial status law, and we're going to be going over that here in just a few minutes in great detail. So who is a person with a disability? How would we define somebody with a disability? Well, HUD says that a person with a disability includes any individual who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more life activities, an individual with a record of such impairment, or an individual who's regarded as having such an impairment. The physical or mental impairment includes, but is not limited to, some examples: orthopedic, visual, speech, and hearing impairments, cerebral palsy, autism, epilepsy, muscular dystrophy, multiple sclerosis, cancer, heart disease, diabetes, HIV or AIDS-related illness, developmental disabilities, mental illness, drug addiction, and alcoholism. So those are all listed as disabilities under the fair housing laws. Remember, on AIDS or HIV-related illness, to be very careful that you don't make any comments about that. If you were to have a buyer and they said, do you know if the seller has HIV or any kind of AIDS-related illness, your response should always be, I have no disclosure information on that. And then you want to change the subject very, very quickly because we don't want to answer that because we could get in trouble. That's a violation of the fair housing laws, so we don't ever want to talk about that or disclose anything on that. We could actually get a large fine on that. HUD stands for Housing and Urban Development. So let's talk about familial status and what exactly that is. Pardon me. As I was telling you, it started out called family composition, and nobody knew what in the world that stood for, so they decided to change the name to familial status, and I think a lot of people probably still don't know what that stands for. But familial status, pardon me, is if there's a child under the age of 18 who is living with a parent or a legal guardian. It also applies to pregnant women. So if I were showing an apartment to somebody who did not have any children, I need to show that same exact apartment to somebody who does have children. So they all get the same equal opportunity to live there, whether you have children, whether you don't have children, whether you're pregnant, whether you're not pregnant. Everybody gets the same right to live there. Now, there are two exceptions to the familial status rule, and that is a 55 and up community. A 55 and up community can advertise as being a 55 and up community and not violate the familial status rule as long as they have 80% of the people who have one person who is an owner or a tenant who is 55 and up in those apartments or house or whatever it might be in that community. The other 20% could be any age. So that's one exception to familial status. The second exception is a 62 and up community, and that has a 100% rule. So on that one, 100% of the people who own or lease have to have one person who lives in that property who is 62 and up. So again, familial status, if you have a child under the age of 18 living with a parent or a legal guardian, also applies to pregnant women. Your exceptions to it, a 55 and up community with an 80-20 rule, and also a 62 and up community that has that 100% rule. I think this will absolutely be on your licensing exam, so make certain that you do understand all of this. Let's talk about steering. Steering is the number one reason that agents get in trouble under the fair housing laws. I want you to keep in mind that HUD sends out shoppers and they pose as a client and they're trying to see if the agent is following the fair housing laws or not following the fair housing laws. Some of them are outstanding actors and actresses. So a lot of times you will really think that that is your client. So the best advice I have for you is that you always pretend your client is somebody from HUD or from your local licensing board, so you will remember to always follow the rule. Bianca, the 80-20 rule, that has to do with familial status, and that's the 55 and up communities. 80% have to be 55 and up. The other 20% could be any age. So let's go back to steering because I want to make sure you really understand this, because again, this is one of it actually is the largest lawsuit that we see coming from the fair housing laws. You have to be so careful on this. This is where you're taking someone to or away from an area based on a protected class. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Let's say that Sarah tells me she wants to live near the Jewish synagogue. Well, religion is a protected class. I can't base my search on that, because if I'm taking her to an area based on religion, I am steering. Think how easy that would be to miss, because your client told you that's where they wanted to live. You're just trying to do what your client said. So this is where you really have to know the laws and rules. Sarah, let me go ahead and just explain fair housing to you. I'm not able to base my search on a protected class, and that would come under religion. Give me a zip code where you would like to live. Tell me the subdivision name where you would like to live. You could draw me a square on the map, and I could do a search on that. I was looking in the MLS the other day, and most of you are probably familiar with what the MLS is. That's where all of the listings are put so that all the agents can see which properties are for sale and all that. So I'm sure you're probably all familiar with that. We have to be careful that we're not steering in our descriptions of the property. And I saw one that said it was in walking distance of the Jewish synagogue. Well, what does that say to me? First of all, that says I've got to be able to walk to live in that property, and I need to probably be Jewish. So we've got two problems going on there. Let's not use in walking distance. We could say close proximity to something. That would be a whole lot better than the way they've described this. And then let's not identify with any of the protected classes, whether it be race, religion, or whatever. So that Jewish synagogue definitely should not have been there. Veronica, you're confused? It can be very, very confusing. Yeah, a lot of agents are confused on this. So remember that the Jewish synagogue, that would come under religion. Even if the client's asking, this is where you have to know the laws and rules, it would be steering. Yeah, absolutely. So you want to not base your searches on that. Zip code, subdivision name, things of that sort. Yeah, walking, be very careful about it. You never know when HUD's going to say, no, that is not okay. You're right, Jane, it can be very confusing. Just don't overthink it. Just remember that we're not going to base any of our searches on anything that has to do with a protected class. Well, it's steering because we're taking somebody to or from an area. What if we put race in there? Somebody said, I want you to take me to a neighborhood where it's all Caucasians or all African Americans or something like that. You would immediately know that that is wrong. You cannot do that. So just insert religion there. It's the same thing because those are both protected classes. So you've got to be very, very careful with that. This is where you have to know the laws. You have to know the rules so that you can represent your clients effectively. I promise you there are many agents that do not know this rule, and there are a lot of them that end up with a very large fine. And I'm going to go over how large those fines are with you here in just a few minutes. So you'll be amazed how large they are. The next slide talks about steering a little bit more. And there was an article in the National Association of Realtors. Now, I want to point something out to you because I want you to be very educated agents. First of all, let's talk about the word realtor. Let's just take a little side trip right here. Please make sure you're pronouncing it with 2 syllables, not 3, just 2. So it's realtor. You probably hear a lot people say realtor or realtor. It only has 2 syllables. We don't say docator or lawyer. So remember, realtor. I think it's very unprofessional when people don't know how to pronounce their titles. So that's not going to be any of you. You're going to know exactly how to pronounce that correctly. Now, also note there that I have it in all capital letters. Let me point out to you that when I have it in all capital letters there, that's because this is a trademarked name. So if I can't find the little registered symbol, the little R in the circle, I can put it in all caps and I'm still in compliance. It's better if you add the little registered symbol, but if you can't find it on your computer, you're still fine with it like I have it. Also, remember that you are going to get licensed as a sales agent or broker. You have to be a member of the National Association of Realtors in order to call yourself a realtor. So you don't get licensed at that. You have to be a member of the National Association of Realtors. So anyway, I wanted to point that out to you because we're talking about an article and they have some great information once you get your license, to read about. So they had an article, it was dated July 10th of 2020, and it says that despite being illegal under the Fair Housing Act, a recent investigation conducted by the newspaper Newsday has shown that steering continues to be pervasive. Newsday had real estate agents show properties to one white tester and one minority tester, either African American, Hispanic, or Asian, with similar housing needs and financial capabilities. The investigation revealed that in 24% of cases, the real estate agents directed the white tester into deferring communities from the minority testers, suggesting evidence of steering. Folks, we can't steer. It is against the law to do that. It's a fair housing violation, and also everybody gets the same equal right. So steering is not okay, and this test shows that people are still doing this. So we want to make certain that that you're not doing this and that you understand this rule, that you understand this law. Okay, let's talk about block busting. Steering will be on your exam for sure, no doubt about it. Block busting, you're going to see this on your exam. Steering, you may hear called channeling. So remember, steering and channeling are one and the same. Block busting may also be called panic peddling. So you may see it either way. Most of the time they say block busting, but occasionally on your exam they will say panic peddling. So block busting is panic selling. That's just telling property owners, hey, you need to sell now while values are still high because there's another race or class, or maybe they're saying, hey, there's a church going to be built here or whatever. They're moving in and we think values are going to go down because of that. So it's panic selling. You're making somebody go into a panic that they need to do something right then. And so that's not allowed. And that's called block busting. Totally illegal, not okay. So don't forget your term, block busting. Just remember, block busting is creating some type of panic. The next slide, we're talking about reasonable accommodation. I've got a couple of examples for you. Let's say that there was a tenant who wanted to lease an apartment and they were in a wheelchair. And they did not have reserved parking spaces at that apartment complex. Well, with that person in the wheelchair, that apartment complex does have to provide a reserved spot for that person in the wheelchair to park their vehicle. Also, that tenant who's in the wheelchair, they might need a ramp built up to their apartment. And if that's the case, they have to allow it. Now, they could make that tenant pay for the ramp, and when they leave that property, they could have them remove it, but they have to allow that reasonable accommodation. Oh, y'all like my picture? That's Lindsay Cade. She's pretty spoiled rotten. She rules the roost here at our house. All 4.5 pounds of her. Example number 2, let's talk about service animals. Service animals provide such an amazing service to so many people. You know, the first service animal that we thought about, was for the blind. But you may have a service animal, somebody who has diabetes, somebody who has high blood pressure, somebody that has seizures. We have a friend, and yes, that's my little baby, Lindsay. We have a friend who has a daughter who has seizures. Well, she has a service animal who is so very well trained, and every time this girl is about to have a seizure, the dog goes and gets her medicine and takes it to her mom. So she can smell the chemistry in the girl's body must change when she's about to have a seizure. So the dog can figure that out, get the medication, takes it to the mom. The mom knows a seizure is about to occur, and this helps her daughter from having such a severe seizure. So these service animals do all kinds of wonderful, wonderful things. I used to work at a law firm many years ago, and one of the attorneys had a football injury when he was in high school. And he was in a wheelchair, and he had a service animal that was with him every single day. And if he dropped his keys, whatever, he couldn't bend down and pick them up, but that dog knew how to do everything. So service animals, they have a great service that they do for so many. Now, what I want to remind you of is that if you have an apartment complex, and we'll use that for an example, and they have a no pet policy, if someone has a service animal, they have to allow that service animal. Now, if they can't see your disability, they can ask for a note from your doctor, and I'm going to show you a sample HUD letter on the next slide here shortly. So if they can't see your disability, they can ask that your doctor provide something, but all the doctor can say is that you qualify for a service animal. The doctor is not to put in there what your disability is, because then it goes in and it starts violating your confidentiality rights, your HIPAA rights, things of that sort. So the letter is only going to state that the doctor says, yes, you do qualify for that service animal. So even if it is a no pet policy, they have to allow your service animal. Also, if they charge a pet deposit, they cannot collect a pet deposit. They cannot charge a monthly pet rent. Now, if your animal were to damage the property, yes, they could make you pay for that if they could prove that. That's some information on service animals. I have on the next slide, I thought this would be super helpful for you. On the next slide, this is on HUD's website. This is going to be a sample letter. So if somebody is renting an apartment or a single family property, it could be, any type of thing. And you do have a service animal and they say, hey, we cannot see your disability. We need some type of proof that you do need the service animal. Well, at HUD's website, they have a sample letter that you could pull up, and you could use this. And it also goes in and says that they may want also attached to this that note from the doctor that you do qualify. That's right. You're right, Ron. It's not a pet. It is a human. That's like a human. Yes, absolutely. Yes, they're not to be referred to as a pet. And if it is an apartment complex that has like maybe a 2-pet limit, and you have two dogs that are just regular dogs, they're not performing any kind of special service. If that third dog you have is a service animal, they cannot count it as as a dog. So I hope that makes sense. So they cannot count it as an actual animal because it is performing a service. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh yeah, lots of veterans with PTSD. Oh my goodness, don't these animals do the most important job of all for people with PTSD? What a fantastic service they do. Oh, Paul says, "What is human?" Bill says, "Human." So, okay. Yes. All right. Oh, it's baby talk for human. Okay. That's how cats refer to humans. Y'all are too much fun. Now let's talk about those huge fines I was telling you about. I told you that HUD sends out shoppers and they pose as a client. You've got to be super careful that you know all of this. The first fine for a fair housing violation is up to $75,000. That's a lot of money. The second fine and any after that is up to $150,000. So $75,000 and then $150,000. So that is a lot of money. I can think of a lot better things to spend my money on than a fine. So this is why you have to know these rules and you have to make sure you're following them. And you will have numerous questions on your licensing exam that have to do with this. So be very, very careful with your studying. Make your suitcase of fair housing laws so that you remember all of this. The next slide, we're going to talk about how long do you have to file a fair housing complaint. Well, HUD says that you have to file your complaint within 1 year of the last date of the alleged discrimination under the Fair Housing Act. Other civil rights authorities allow for complaints to be filed after 1 year for good cause. But the FHEO, which is the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, that's what that stands for, recommends filing as soon as possible. Another, I'll come back to your questions here in just a second. Does HUD have fines? That fine is from HUD. Yeah, that's $75,000 and $150,000 because remember, fair housing is governed under HUD. So yeah, that's coming directly from that. Can anyone direct you to obtain a service dog for your husband? Yes, and also you might talk to your doctor. Is that state specific? Ball, give me a little more information on your question. Is that state specific? If you're asking about the fine amount, no, that's federal law. State and local laws. Many of your different states, and we have a lot of different states represented here today, they have laws as well. So on the state portion of your licensing exam, make sure you have studied what your state laws are. You also will have some local laws for the city that you live in. Like I live in the Dallas, Texas area. So we have some local laws to remember as well. On the state portion of your test, they're going to be more state specific because there's no way they could go in and include all those local laws. That 1 year, no, that was from HUD. That was the federal. You're right, Ron. HUD does not mess around. You want to be HUD's best friend. You do not want any fines or anything from HUD. Oh, Aaron. Thank you for your service. Aaron was military. Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for your service. We really all appreciate that very, very much. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, Joe's telling you California, the state-specific context is mixed in with a general exam. So go in and classify it. Is it in the state suitcase or in the federal suitcase so that you're sure about that? Yeah. Oh, good, Ron. Says that's making sense. Yeah. Okay. So that's what I want you to know about the fair housing laws. Don't forget to be an expert at them. When you're studying for your exam, after you get your license, you have got to remember those laws so that you can represent your clients correctly. and you also don't end up with one of those huge fines. So let's talk about some other federal laws. We've got the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's Title 8 of the Americans with Disabilities Act. That prohibits discrimination against persons with disabilities in places of public accommodations and commercial facilities. So that's why doors have to be a certain size. There have to be ramps, leading up to some different areas. You have so many handicapped parking places, things of that sort. And I never really thought about that too much because we had been very blessed that we had not, had any kind of disabilities. But my husband broke his knee one year, and he was in a wheelchair. And I was amazed at all we learned about Americans with Disabilities Act because, that wheelchair would just barely fit in some of those doors and all. So we learned a lot about that act when we actually experienced him being in that wheelchair. Another act we're going to talk about is the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. And so this makes it unlawful for anybody who's applying for credit to be discriminated against on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, sex, marital status, age, or because all or part of applicant's income derives from any public assistance program. So everybody is evaluated exactly the same when they are getting a loan on property. So that's your Equal Credit Opportunity Act. Oh, Janet, thank you so much. I love to teach. It's such a joy. I count it quite an honor to get to teach you. Yes, Pravina, yes, you could have 2 service animals, I'm sure, both husband and wife. I don't think there's a limit to how many service animals you could have, but, just double check with your doctor, things of that sort. Let's talk about redlining, another law you need to remember. I am positive this will be on your licensing exam. So the Federal Reserve, they are the ones who kind of oversee things like redlining, and they state that this term refers to the presumed practice of mortgage lenders of drawing red lines around portions of a map to indicate areas or neighborhoods in which they don't want to make loans. Totally illegal. Redlining on a racial basis has been held by the courts to be an illegal practice. You will get that question on your licensing exam. They may ask you who could be guilty of redlining, and your answer will be banks. A bank can be guilty of redlining. Let's talk about some environmental issues. I have my green designation, and I find the environmental part fascinating. If you are looking for a designation to get after you get your license, that is a National Association of Realtors designation, so that might be something you look into if this topic interests you. Lead is if your home was built before 1978, there is a good chance it might have lead-based paint. So as far as the lead-based paint, in 1978, the federal government banned consumer uses of lead-containing paint, but there were some states that banned it even earlier. So lead from paint, including lead-contaminated dust, is one of the most common causes of lead poisoning. So if some paint were to chip off, and especially if a small child were to put that in their mouth and eat it, it can cause all kinds of neurological damages. So we know that there is great danger in paint that was prior to 1978. I want you to be real careful because you may get this question from your client. They may say, well, gosh, I think it's been painted over 4 or 5 times. Do you think there's any chance of lead, piece of paint with lead in it chipping off the wall and all? And your response, I would have no knowledge on that. If you are concerned about that, you want to have an environmental inspection done on that property. Remember that the seller has to disclose if the property was built prior to 1978 and they know if there was any kind of lead in the property. If you're representing a buyer, you have to make sure that they understand that it has the potential in that house to have lead. There is a brochure called Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home that has to be given to anybody purchasing a property built prior to 1978. You also will have some state-specific forms that have to be given and signed by everybody on lead-based paint. And a lot of times, or actually pretty much all the time, the brokers are going to have to sign that form as well. So this is a huge deal. Anything built prior to 1978, so prior to 1978, don't forget this, has the potential to have lead-based paint, and this must be disclosed, okay? So seller has disclosure obligations, buyer has to be informed, and don't forget about this, protect your family from lead in your home. What I do, and I'm going to recommend this to you, is I always have a buyer's consultation with my buyers, and I go ahead and I'm the teacher for my buyer. You know, I'm just the teacher. I'm teaching them about real estate. And I remind them that the property, if it's built prior to 1978, might very well have lead-based paint. Well, I give them this brochure to read. They call me the next day and they say, hey, you know what? We don't even want to look at any properties built before 1978. So I've saved them a lot of time, and I've saved me a lot of time as well. So lead-based paint can be very harmful. Remember, if it's built before 1978, it could have lead-based paint. I want you to be extremely careful to read that question on your licensing exam. I know you're going to get a question on that. And remember this slide and the information if it was built prior to 1978. Let's talk about asbestos. Oh yeah, Bill, he says they put lead in gas. Let's talk about, so we talk about in a home lead being in the paint, but you're exactly right. It could be in other things as well. We have an area close to the Dallas area where there was a plant, a battery plant, that was one of the top 10 pollutants in the United States. And it was emitting dangerous levels of lead that was getting down in the soil. It was also down in the creek. And they actually were testing people's blood who were in close proximity to that plant. They finally closed the plant down because it was so very, very toxic. One of the 10 top pollutants in the United States. So you're exactly right. Lead could be in other things as well. Let's talk about asbestos. Well, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, they say that asbestos is a mineral fiber that occurs in rock and soil, and that asbestos could be found in attic and wall insulation, vinyl floor tiles and backing on vinyl sheet flooring and adhesives, roofing and siding shingles, textured paint and patching compounds used on walls and ceilings, walls and floors around wood-burning stoves protected with asbestos paper, millboard, or cement sheets, hot water and steam pipes coated with asbestos material or covered with an asbestos blanket or tape, oil and coal furnaces and door gaskets with asbestos insulation, heat-resistant fabrics, automobile clutches and brakes. The danger in asbestos is if you remove it, you have to remember that that area has to be encapsulated because that asbestos dust can get down in your lungs and it can cause you all kinds of health issues. So asbestos, very, very toxic. So you probably will get an asbestos question on the licensing exam. The next one we're going to talk about is radon. Pardon me. Radon is a colorless, odorless, naturally occurring radioactive inert gas formed by radioactive decay of radium atoms in soils or rocks. A lot of times, states that have houses with basements, not always, it could be other things as well, they can have radon. And so radon is a cause of lung cancer, they have found. So it can cause you lots of health issues. It can be very, very toxic. As you're seeing from these slides, houses can make you sick. And that's why we want to know all this information so that when a buyer purchases a home, then they're making sure that it's a healthy home. They're having the different inspections done on the property to make sure that this is a healthy home that's not going to make them sick. Yeah, your body can't remove asbestos fibers from your lungs. Vincent says, yeah, it's extremely toxic, very much so. Yeah. Says you can buy a radon kit online. Okay. Don't it always, if your clients ask you a question about any type of radon or asbestos, we're not the expert in that. We're not an environmental inspector, so we always want to remind them that if they're concerned about that, they want to have an environmental inspection done on that property. Let's talk about mold. There are many different species of mold. It can make people extremely ill. The EPA defines mold as a natural part of the environment. It can be found almost anywhere that moisture and oxygen are present. There are many types of mold, and all of them need water or moisture to grow. The problems when mold is growing indoors. So that's why if we have any type of water damage or any kind of leak in our property, we want to make sure that it's remediated immediately. We don't want to waste any time because it doesn't take very long for mold to start growing. If it's a very, very small area, and I'm talking very small, then an owner could take care of their own mold, but I don't ever think that's a good idea. And what we need to do is have an expert come in to see what kind of mold it is, and then to remediate that mold and make sure that that they get that taken care of and it's not there any longer. I'll tell you a personal story on this. My son had moved into a brand new apartment. Brand new, never been lived in. He moved in, this is several years ago, in November. And every time we would see him, he was coughing, he didn't feel well. You know, a mom just knows that he just did not look like he felt well. And so I would ask him, you know, why are you coughing all the time? He said, I don't know. I guess it's an allergy or something. So a couple of months later, we were having dinner with him, and I thought, okay, this has gone on way too long. Now he's looking kind of gray in color. His eyes, they're watering. You can just tell he feels horrible. And he said, you know, Mom, he said, I have felt bad since I moved into that apartment. He said, I'm going back to the apartment, I'm getting my flashlight out, and I'm going to look in every nook and cranny in that apartment. About an hour later, I get a phone call from him, and he's also texted me a picture. Turned out he had black mold in the apartment. So back behind the water heater, he was on an exterior wall, and it wasn't the water heater that was leaking, but you really couldn't see this unless you got kind of back behind and looked at the wall behind the water heater. Apparently, one of the plumbers had not capped a pipe correctly in the wall, so it had been leaking over a period of time. So it was wet, dry, wet, dry, wet, dry. It had caused black mold. You will not believe what his breathing capacity, 33% decrease in his breathing capacity. I had him at the doctor immediately. Thankfully, we moved him out right away. And within a couple of weeks, his breathing capacity was back to normal. It cost us about $10,000 because of the fact that he did not have any mold coverage on his insurance, on his renter's insurance. So it was about $10,000 because those little mold spores, they attached to everything. And so things we could wipe down with a Clorox wipe, he got to keep. Other things we had to throw in the trash. I think his dry cleaning bill alone was like $800. I mean, it was quite costly. Yes, Ron, mold is definitely disgusting. So again, we want buyers to be healthy when they move into a property. If it's a seller, we want them to disclose everything so that they don't have that liability, that they have told the truth about everything they know about that property. So mold can definitely make people quite ill. Oh, Michelle had a situation like that too. Yeah, they can really make people sick. Oh, Allie. Oh, wow. Oh, gosh, you've got mold now. Oh, I'm sorry. Stay healthy. Make sure you do everything to make sure that you get that remediated. Yeah. Is that the landlord's problem? Well, you would think so, but that's another story. We won't get into that right now. So the landlord really did not care, unfortunately. Yeah, they didn't disclose anything to the next people that moved in either. I hate old house. Okay, and so mold could be, that was, remember that apartment story I told you about was a brand new apartment. So it could be in an older home, it could be in a newer home. It's just all about water damage. Asbestos. So just remember on asbestos that was used like to insulate things. And the problem with asbestos is the removal of it. You have to be very careful, so everything has to be encapsulated when asbestos is removed. And if you guys want to read in more detail on some of this, you can always go to the EPA's website, so epa.gov, and they have some fantastic information. I think epa.gov, and then you can go to the search engine and you can pull up the different topics. Yeah, Allison, you're right. It was a nightmare. But you know what? We're okay with having to pay for all that money as long as he was healthy. That's the most important thing, and his health returned. So we were just so very thankful. Yeah, mold does become everybody's problem. Yeah. Bill, you're exactly right. Ventilation in bathrooms is a big thing. Also, air conditioning systems, they can also produce mold, so you got to be careful with that. Hi, Abigail from Texas. I'm in Texas as well. Good to see you here today. Some of the prep agent questions that go along with our discussion of today. The first one we're going to talk about is block busting. So we talked about this under the fair housing. So block busting occurs when, and the answer on that is the broker uses racial fears to prompt people in a changing neighborhood to sell their homes. Remember, I told you that's panic selling. So that is block busting. I am positive that's going to be on your licensing exam. Your next question from prep agent is going to be on which of the following acts requires public accommodations to be made accessible to all people, and that's the Americans with Disabilities Act. We talked about that earlier. And that became law in 1990. Your next question. Title 8 of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, also known as the Federal Fair Housing Act, prohibits discrimination in which of the following categories, and that's the sale of homes and home loan lending. The next prep agent question, what is steering? Channeling of prospective home buyers to or away from particular neighborhoods, thereby limiting their choices. Remember, I told you this is the number one thing that we see as far as lawsuits regarding the fair housing laws. And you can go into HUD.gov and you can actually pull up some of those different lawsuits. The other one we see a lot of is on familial status. We see a lot of lawsuits related to fair housing laws on that as well. So just to recap what we've talked about, we've gone over a lot of the fair housing laws, very important. Everything I put on those screens, those were all things that I picked out, especially for you, so you could get them right on the licensing exam. We also talked about the ADA, we talked about redlining, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. We talked about some environmental issues because we want those buyers to move into healthy homes. We want the seller not to have liability because they didn't disclose that they had an issue with the property. So all of that extremely, extremely important. Our suitcase that we have filled with knowledge today is on the federal fair housing and the environmental. Don't forget to be using your suitcase theory for each of the different topics that you're learning about. I also recommend that maybe you do your studying by topic. So maybe one day you study agency, one day maybe you study contracts. The prep agent material is the best that is out there. It is fantastic. You have so many different avenues that you can study. Don't forget, you've got the ebook, you've got the vocabulary words, you've got the practice exams, you've got the webinars you can go back and look at, you've got the little short clip videos that are quite helpful as well. So utilize all of that information. If I can help you in any way, don't forget that I do tutoring for the exam. I count it quite an honor to get to help you. So let me know any way that I can help. And I'll look forward to talking with you again soon. I hope you all have a fantastic day. Bye-bye.